Australia is still in political limbo. Vote counting resumed Tuesday following Saturday's vote, but the race is still too close to call. Officials warn the victor may not be known for days or even weeks. Over 1 million postal votes have to be counted. Neither Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's Conservative coalition nor opposition leader Bill Shorten's Labour Party have won a majority of the seats. I want to bring in L Bleich. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Australia. So it's a wild one there. Vote counting continuing, still too close to call. What do you make of all of this?
Well, you know, it's not quite Bush versus Gore. That was a few weeks longer, but this is unprecedented, and at least in recent Australian election memory. And I went through a hung parliament and a minority coalition government when I was ambassador, but this is just as close and a real nail-biter.
Ambassador, Australia seems to have this revolving door when it comes to prime ministers. In September of 2015, this was the headline in The Independent. Tony Abbott removed. Australia has had 5 prime ministers in 5 years. So the question, I guess, is that any way to run a government?
Well, it's a little bit of an exaggeration. Kevin Rudd was prime minister twice during that period, so you're counting him twice. But it has been an unusual period of turbulence in leadership. Prior to these past 5 years, you had very long tenures for prime ministers, including Prime Minister Howard, who served for 12 years immediately before Kevin Rudd. So this is unusual.
How do you think this one's going to shake out when the final votes are tallied?
Well, I think they pay other people more money to figure this out. But my sense is that right now there is the coalition has a lead. The question is whether they can secure enough votes to have majority government, or whether neither party can form a majority, and they're going to have to compete to form a minority coalition government. And that's still too uncertain at this stage in the voting, at least in the counting. The voting's done. Let
me ask you about voter sentiment, because recent polling shows that Australian support for the military alliance with the United States is slipping over concerns about a possible Donald Trump presidency. Australians also evenly split on whether the country's relationship with China or the U.S. is more important, right around 43% apiece. Does the U.S. have some work to do when it comes to shoring up its relationship with Australia?
Well, I think the relationship between the U.S. and Australia has remained very strong. And in fact, even the turbulence in our current politics in both countries, I think, is a reflection of how similar we are in many, many ways. So I don't put much stock in polls to that effect, particularly the ones about the relationship and confidence in the United States. There was a period where that confidence dipped during the Iraq War and the global financial crisis, and it came roaring back during the following years. And so right now we're in a slightly unsettled period, and you see it around the world. And so it's not surprising that the polls anywhere that you took them would reflect that people are rethinking some of the long-held assumptions. I don't think that's a long-term trend, but I do think it's present today.
Well, let me pounce on what you just said, because we've seen Brexit, we've seen the rise of anti-establishment lawmakers there in Australia. We're seeing this surge here in the United States, Bernie Sanders on the one side, Donald Trump on the other. What do we read into all of this?
You know, I think it's a very interesting time for democracies for a whole variety of reasons. Technology is moving at a dramatic pace, and I think there's a sense within societies that we're having trouble keeping up with it, that technology's kind of run away and government is walking away at a critical time. I think there are also, systemic challenges that we've been looking at for years, whether it has to do with wages, whether it has to do with shifting demographics, or whether it has to do with just feelings that were engendered, negative feelings that were engendered during the global financial crisis that are now being expressed. But there are a lot of different things going on simultaneously, and they're being expressed in terms of some resistance to things that we've seen as real positives: technology, globalization, trade. People are starting to rethink some of their insights because they're a little uncertain about where this is all leading. And if ever there were a time for politicians to think about innovative ways of addressing the public and help them better understand the direction that this is all moving, now would be the time. And I think the public is saying that in a variety of ways.
Former Ambassador Jeffrey Bleich, thanks so much for joining us from San Francisco.